Good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll just leave maybe 30 seconds for everyone to be able to dial in before we start with our event today within the Impact Week here in Frankfurt. We're very excited for this event. It will be, the week started actually Friday in Frankfurt, and on Thursday, Friday, we'll have the first live event here in Frankfurt. We're very excited with this for Impact Festival, who is a partner actually from European Champions Alliance. So I think probably everyone could dial in now. So again, hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to have this event with you, this webinar where we will discuss the role of green tech in decarbonising the financial industry. My name is Cécile Garcia Goff. I'm a strategy consultant focusing on internationalization as well as business development, and will be your co-host for this session.
Yeah, also very welcome from my side. My name is Schmitt. I joined the ECA half a year ago. I'm very excited to moderate this panel. My personal background is in business administration, but also the technology industry. I have a deep background here in the sustainability topics. Currently, I work at one of the leading startup and fintechs hub, pushing green transformation with corporate partners, such as one of the leading banks. So I'm very excited for this great panel that we have here today. And I said, welcome and looking forward to the next hour of discussion.
Thank you, Lucas. And you already mentioned the GreenTech Focus Group. So this event is organized by the GreenTech Focus Group, which Lucas and I happen to be part of, and which I also happen to lead as part of the ECA. ECA stands for European Champions Alliance and is a non-for-profit European initiative association, which was founded early 2020 by a group of passionate business development experts as well as entrepreneurs, and with the target of developing and supporting the growth of European digital champions. So, well, this is a pretty broad project. So this is why ECA is organized around different focus groups, amongst which the GreenTech Focus Group. And in the GreenTech Focus Group, we want to support the growth of European green tech champions. We concentrate our efforts on technologies as well as new business models that support the transition towards a more sustainable economy, a more environment-friendly economy. Now, our work supports bringing together the various and very fragmented European ecosystems, creating more transparency. And we focus on, first of all, supporting more access to funding and business and finance for green tech companies, which is crucial for startups and scale-ups. We work also to connect the ecosystems, provide more networking. And last but not least, we support the way to more standards, frameworks, as well as accountability, which is absolutely crucial in this area. We see a lot which is being done with regard to fighting climate change and transitioning towards a more sustainable economy. And all this is very important and is a good thing. But we need to ensure that this is done the right way and in a more harmonized manner. So this is what we want to be discussing in the next more or less hour. We have a fantastic panel, which we'll briefly introduce in a minute. Just before we dive into this, I'd like to flag two items. The first one is that this is being recorded for replay purposes. The other item is questions. We want this session to be as informative as possible for all of you. So please don't hesitate to put your questions. There's a little box on the right-hand corner that you should see, Q&A. And we're more than happy for you to put your questions in there. We'll try and answer as much as possible as we go through the session.
Perfect. With that, so as Cécile already said, the idea of this event is really to raise awareness. This is the first event on green tech in Europe. And for this, I think the topic of the role of green tech within the Net Zero Banking Alliance is a perfect topic to discuss it and position this topic. For that, we have three very great speakers on board. The first one that I would like to welcome is Lyubomila Jordanova. She's founder and CEO of Planet Earth, one of the currently, in my opinion, hottest startups in the European ecosystem, but also according to several awards and nominees that they get currently. Planet Earth is a Berlin-based startup developing an end-to-end platform that enables companies to measure, monitor, and reduce the environmental footprint and improve their ESG performance. Miller will say a little bit more about that, of course, later. And next to that, Miller is also co-founder of GreenTech Alliance, a community of more than 500 startups which are connected to over 350 advisors from VC, media, and business. And it's very great to have you. Welcome, Miller, as our first speaker. Next to that, we have Christian Coutier. He's co-founder of Carbon Matrix. He founded Carbon Matrix in 2020, which develops a fact-based climate intelligence platform that enables investors and lenders in financing companies towards a low-carbon economy. Christian is also active as business angel and has invested over the last 4 years in more than 30 startups or scale-ups. He has a background in strategy consultancy and investment, where he worked in the past as partner, shareholder, investment committee at Astorg. Welcome, also great to have you on board, Christian. Last but not least, we have Frank Siebert with us. He's more from the banking side, so from the company side. He's head of sustainable business at Germany at BNP Paribas for corporate and institutional banking. Frank is an innovative and growth-driven leader of sustainable and renewable finance topics with a passion for growing banking presence in future-facing energy solutions. He has in-depth experience. He has a long background in banking and finance. Additionally to that, his position at BNP Paribas is also a member of the Sustainable Finance Committee, so advising the federal government for sustainability topics. And not all of that, he's also with BNP Paribas, one of the founding members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is of course great to have you. Welcome, Frank. Great to have you on the panel. So with having introduced this great lineup of speakers, let's cut the intro part and really start with the discussion. As a short refresher for everyone that is new to the topic or haven't dived too deep into the Net Zero Banking Alliance, let me briefly recap what the Net Zero Banking Alliance is. The Net Zero Banking Alliance was launched on the 21st of April this year. It is an industry-led UN-convened alliance that brings together 55 banks from 28 countries, representing almost a quarter of global banking assets, which are, to put that in numbers, 37 trillion US dollars. So with this amount of assets, the members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance are committed to align their lending and investment portfolios with net zero emissions by 2050. With that, of course, you can just imagine how powerful this tool can be towards a transition for a more sustainable finance and banking industry, which is why I think is a very good kickoff for this great discussion here on the role of green tech within the Net Zero Banking Alliance with our lineup. So without further ado and talking about the Net Zero Banking Alliance by myself, let's start to get someone on board in this discussion, Frank, who is actively with BNP Paribas as part of the members. And yeah, welcome, Frank. Let's start maybe with a short introduction. Who are you and what is your role and your goals with BNP Paribas?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning to all, and thanks for having me here. Yeah, you already made a couple of introductions, so I'll keep it a little bit shorter. So my name is Frank Siebert. As mentioned, I'm heading here the Sustainable Advisory and Business Group since 2016. This group was founded on the initiative of our BNP Group strategy on the back of the 2015 COP21 in Paris. And obviously, as Germany is a big market in Europe in terms of CO2 emissions, but also in terms of industry base, that's a key market for BNP also to essentially bring its commitments and its beliefs on sustainable banking to the market. In that group, I basically, my team is focused on advising both training internal colleagues, because there's a constant development and challenge there, but more importantly, to really engage at the highest level possible with our clients in order to really bring forward the commitment of net zero, which is basically relatively new, but from the start that we see us as a banking institutions, and we are spanning 72 countries, which is quite important, and not so many banks are doing that. And also our message was always that we do this also for our own risk management, because we believe in man-made climate change, and it will impact globally in various parts of the world, and therefore our clients will be impacted and we will be impacted. So it's really also for us to basically develop a sustainable business model forwards. We need to engage with our clients. So that's one of the commitments and convictions we're having. Now, that basically is really the core of our activities here in Germany.
After Frank, after my brief introduction on the Net Zero Banking Alliance, can you maybe in your words elaborate a bit more? What is the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and what is the motivation of BNP Paribas of being part of the alliance and also being co-founding partner?
So for us, it's really an extension of what I think BNP Group and also 5 other banks have already been started to do back in Katowice, when basically BNP together with 4 other banks signed a Katowice commitment, which essentially is a kind of a pretext of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. At that point in time, end of 2017, we committed ourselves to jointly work with, at that point in time, 5 banks to develop methodologies to basically decarbonize our portfolio. And I think is basically the core of also what we believe is necessary. At that point in time, we still committed to a 2-degree scenario. So it's basically in line with the COP21 decisions, 2 degrees, ideally to 1.5 degree. And what basically has been evolved also with the discussion of the European taxonomy and our involvement in the EU Sustainable Finance Platform, where we are also part of, is a conviction that we need to do more. And the financial system needs to be more in order to really achieve the 1.5 degree scenario. And that was a conviction which the management took after long debate, because committing to 1.5 degree, it will require, and we'll come to that later, a substantial work, not only with us, but also with other financial institutions to really develop methodologies which are then basically helping and also transparent enough for our clients to basically steer their business in future. So for us, the conviction is that, and why we have joined this net zero banking, both in Germany, but in April this year globally, is that we clearly believe that we require the collective work of the financial system globally to really achieve methodologies and develop methodologies which are then being applied for each bank. But we all need basically to have similar approaches in order to make sure that we reach that time. And also the second conviction is that we need to accelerate. And that was also one of the basically conviction that it's not enough to be carbon neutral by 2050 for the majority of portfolio, but we want to basically accelerate this to 2030. It's still work in progress.
With you already mentioned the first initiatives. Why joining this alliance, and where do you see the biggest leverages that you can have as a complete alliance in that sense as part of the Net Zero Banking Alliance?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned, I mean, initially there were 43 banks when at the date of signing. Now they're around 55, as you said, and I think that is basically back in the Katowice agreement, but also here, it's never was basically a club of convicted banks. It was always the attempt to basically say, yes, we go ahead as a collective banks here, or financial institution, we have to be clear, but also basically to ensure that more and more financial institution banks are joining this approach. And therefore, we kind of, next to the regional initiatives which we signed, and although the Katowice agreement was much more focused on Europe, we believe it's a global issue which we need to tackle globally. So I think for us, the key development and change is that it's now a global initiative, which will hopefully, over a period of time, incentivize other global financial institutions to join.
You mentioned the topic of methodologies that you want to derive together. I think, of course, this is everyone being in the field of sustainable finance, of course, one of the big topics, that there are many standardizations, there are many different approaches. So you said you are planning to develop or derive a methodology to measure the impact of credits, investment portfolios. Concretely, can you elaborate more? What does this mean? Is this, how does it work, and what are you working on?
Well, as part of that initiative, clearly, I think there are a number of points which have developed. So first of all, we are now in the Net Zero Banking Alliance. I think the Scope 3 calculation using the PCAF approach is a very much new and key element to develop. But we're also looking how to basically increase and utilize factor methodologies which are basically being developed in order to really measure or provide methodologies to measure the progression within our portfolio. And I think that is the most important part. It's not that we target basically to be carbon neutral at one point in time, but it's there to define transformation pathways, which will allow our clients to basically, or allow us to decarbonize. But in order to do so, we also engage with the what is called Pathways to Paris initiative in Germany, which is PwC and WWF supported, which is engaging also with the industrial clients to basically understand their way and their technology, which they will apply today and tomorrow, in order for us to understand what is a technology possible way, how will data be generated, and then to basically see basically pack this into our methodologies to see what data will be available. So I think this is really very much data driven. It's an assessment of where basically corporate clients can develop and which technologies might be used over time, and the impact also on the financing side.
So with that, maybe coming also to today's discussion, also the impact and the role of green tech companies. When talking about all this data, I think of course there are already great solutions, and of course with you as a banks and the signatory banks, you have of course also deep expertise here. How do you see the role and impact of green tech companies towards the goals, and how do you collaborate with green techs, and how do you collaborate already?
Mm-hmm. Obviously at this starting point, and still starting point, because it took us from the Katowice agreement to I think 2020, significant time to basically just get our data, internal data warehouse ready, because it's a new challenge. It's data which we have maybe had but never basically sorted the way we now need it. So that was basically the first step, which was more an in-house approach. Now I think we've entered a phase where some of the green tech are basically approaching, I think here the collective of the net zero banking, at least I can say from German perspective. We are in discussion with some of them, and this is a BNP view, so maybe others might see differently, but I have a relatively good view. I think at this point in time, it's more that the financial institutions are trying to do it themselves. But I would see the role for green tech, and you mentioned it's 1/5 or 1/4 of the global financial community. So there's 3/4 still outstanding, 3/4 still outstanding. And my vision is that as we are progressing, it is more clear where the financial industry will go to. More smaller banks, which do not have all the resources which maybe the initial signatures have, will require basically support. And also, I think as more and more ideas about methodologies which will be generally accepted develop, there will be an ability to scale up by using that and scaling up certain of the solutions. So I think the role of fintechs and green techs will be there. But it might take, in my view, maybe at least from a German perspective, 6 more months to really integrate there, because we are currently still in the process of, well, attempting to see where we actually need support.
Thank you very much. I think this is a perfect handover to already get the first or the green techs that are here today into the discussion.
Absolutely. Excuse me. And thank you so much, Frank, for giving that perspective. I find that very helpful. You also spoke about data, and that this is being a very data-driven methodology. So with that, Lucas already a bit introduced her, Lubomila, and I think it would be wonderful if Lubomila, you would please introduce a bit more on yourself in your own words, but especially show what Plan A Earth is doing, and especially given what we said with the data-driven economy to which we're heading to. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I first of all want to apologize that I'm with mask. I'm on the train to Paris because we're opening our office this week there. So took the sustainable option. A bit about Plan A. So we're a company that exists now for 5 years, and what we've always been doing since the beginning is combining scientific methodologies with technology to enable businesses to make better decisions. Over the last 1.5 years, the financial sector has definitely been prime focus, where we now work with some of the largest private equities, hedge funds, VCs, as well as quite a lot of banks. And what we do together with them is essentially enabling them to use our software that enables accurate scope 1, 2, and 3 calculations, which are automated. Where gaps for the data exist, we're also able to predict these gaps. Based on this data, we're able to automate the reporting according to different standards, also using the framework that was mentioned earlier by Frank, which is PCAF, which is incredibly important and has now been kind of the universally accepted one for calculating scope 3 category 15 emissions, which for those of the audience that don't know is investment or financed emissions. And the final element of the platform is related to zero target setting, plus automatically creating implementation plans. I think maybe just a kind of a sentence on the methodology and the work behind what we do. Planning has been since day one driven by science. More than a quarter of my team is focused on decarbonization, ESG measurement, also carbon accounting at scope 3 level, life cycle analysis, climate modeling. And these are people that have essentially been at the core of what we offer to our clients. What is really exciting about our product is that last week we became the first carbon accounting software that is now certified for its methodology, which means that we have essentially the only solution on the market that has JUF certification for automated carbon accounting that is auditable. I think I would love to make a comment on what Frank was saying in terms of where's the green tech, because this is our industry where the green tech standing in this whole discussion. We actually see a lot of movement because all these hedge funds and banks and private equities that we work with actually have been coming to us. We get a lot more inbound than we have to reach out to someone. And that comes out of the concern that getting to hit net zero is something that is a lengthy exercise. And with internal capabilities that do not include this scientific knowledge, it might be difficult. One example is we work with Apex, one of the biggest private equities in the world. And with the PCAF methodology, we have been able to perform through the software an analysis of all of their portfolio, which is hundreds of companies, given they have billions under management. That is in a nutshell about us. And what I can finish on with is that I'm incredibly happy to see that the industry is now finally moving into tangible action, because when we started 5 years ago, there was definitely a low level of knowledge about the problem that we're addressing and low engagement in terms of businesses.
Thank you very much for this introduction of yourself, as well as what Planet Earth does. So I'm hearing also from what you say some challenges, which had also been mentioned by Frank. One thing I really hear is that we have science-based methodology, which is the most important. One thing I'm also hearing you say is the financial industry. One struggle could be also the reporting. And you said one very important word, in my opinion, which is auditable. Now, could you maybe go a bit more deeper in that, because you do work, so you mentioned, with hedge funds, private equity, with banks. Are there any other challenges or big challenges that you see out there? Because we have already had a bit, but maybe any others which we could go through?
Oh yeah, certainly. Actually, there's a lot of challenges ahead of the industry. And I think some of those that we have noticed most frequently are related to data availability. Banks, and I think this is where also what Frank was saying is absolutely relevant, are coming into terms with the idea that they now need to start tapping into another layer of an environmental analysis that is kind of economically been missing. And what this means is that as our economy looks into KPIs like GDP and others, we kind of have been skipping historically this ESG layer, this environmental layer, if we focus only on the E. And this data availability is not necessarily hindered by the fact that the data doesn't exist, but we're talking about actually finding ways to access this data. This is data from the portfolio. This is data on scope 3 from category 1, purchase goods and services. The second challenge is related to lack of knowledge on where the topic sits. We have seen so many different approaches in every single financial institution. In some companies, this topic is sitting within the risk team. Others have a sustainability team. Others have an impact team. Others have an ESG team. Because sustainability and this preparation for climate risk being financial risk is not necessarily yet something that is deeply embedded in the operation of an organization, it becomes quite challenging for this to really be made tangibly part of the strategy. But I think in 6, even probably up until COP, this is going to change. And then the final challenge that I personally have a very strong opinion on is the lack of understanding of the importance of decarbonization. It's not only about accountability, it's not only about being auditable, it's not only about unifying the reporting standards, but it's also about understanding that focusing on decarbonization would allow financial institutions to protect their own balance sheet.
Thank you very much. I'm just recap your 3 challenges that you see. The one is data availability, not because it's not there, but that we have to redefine basically. And this is not only banks, the KPIs we had as of now, that's the one item. The second item is the lack of knowledge. And I pretty much like what you said, that some teams are not even sitting together. Some is in the sustainability area, some are in the risk area. So I think that's another very big challenge. And so Frank was speaking about big banks as well as smaller banks. And obviously the challenge grows the bigger the corporate. Excuse me. And last but not least, the lack of understanding, as you were saying, that we need the focus on decarbonization at every level so that we just push the green agenda forward. So, and again, as you have now pretty much experience working with financial institutions, these are a lot of challenges and this can seem also very overwhelming. Is there any maybe best practice that you've seen or somewhere just, where's the starting point? I think, is there maybe anything you could share with what you would seem like a good way to first tackle the problem or start tackling the problem?
I think one of the first exciting opportunities that banks in particular have is that they really start looking at the leaders on the market and align themselves to that. I think the Net Zero Banking Alliance is a fantastic example of unified effort to set together a framework that then would be essentially defining the agenda for not one, but multiple organizations at the same time. And as many of you might know, actually the commitments related to the Net Zero Banking Alliance are incredibly significant. First of all, this is signed by the bank, by any of these banks' CEOs. There's also a big focus on really tangible commitments related to 2030. And also there's also a commitment on what it could be achieved for 18 months in terms of setting targets and then what can be achieved even earlier. And what I can say that is maybe a bit more personal. So I will be speaking at COP actually in Glasgow as part of the finance track, which is really exciting as per the invitation of the high-level champion of COP. And what he told me, which was really exciting, was that up until the last 6 months or 12 months, we've seen extensive sprints done individually by many different banks or any kind of institutions. And the effort that COP actually made with the Race to Zero was really to unify these efforts across the different industries. Some of you might have seen the different activities. So there's cities Race to Zero. There's also the ambitions for 1.5 degree alignment. There's also the Net Zero Asset Manager Alliance. There's also the B team with Net Zero by 50. All of these initiatives are kind of aiming to achieve this unification of understanding where you can go. So on a best practice level, going back to your question, I would suggest to anyone that is not yet part of these kinds of consortiums to find their way into them. The second one is to really understand how to deeply work on the process, because I know it doesn't take a minute on embedding ESG and just the sustainability topic in general and decarbonization itself in the day-to-day activities of the different teams, because sustainability is going to become overwhelmingly part of how any team, any department is going to be judged on their success. And then the final element is really to start going beyond the surface. There's so many unfortunate claims that have been made related to net zero or carbon neutrality that only included scope 1 and 2. This does not follow science. If you follow science, you actually need to go through the full-fledged scope 1, 2, and 3 calculation to then be able to neutralize your emissions and obviously start focusing on the decarbonization. So avoiding these kinds of claims at the cost of maybe focusing on action is the final suggestion that I would have.
Thank you so much, Lubomila, for these words. I took a lot of notes. It's extremely informative. And you said something which was really true. And this brings us to the point, which you mentioned also at the beginning, that we need to base ourselves on science, on science-based facts. And I think this is a wonderful transition to Christian, who also works in the green tech area, as Lucas rightly introduced, and Christian, who's also working basically on making data accessible, because his company is also coming from the fact that we just need more facts. Christian, it's lovely to have you here. Thank you very much for being here as well. Would you also like to say a bit more on yourself and on what Carbometrics does?
Thank you very much, Cécile, and thank you very much for having me today on the panel. My background, in a few words, is strategy consultancy, and then I've been an investor in a company called Astorg, which is an LBO fund. And I co-founded Carbometrics a year ago with a mission, which is basically to make companies' carbon performance data accessible and comparable. We help decision makers to direct financial flows towards a low carbon economy, and we develop a platform to provide full emissions, direct and indirect, because we believe that carbon transparency and benchmarks are essential to trigger drastic change towards the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The way we do it is 3 pillars, basically. We gather massive volumes of data. Second, we develop tools to make carbon footprint estimation simple on what's critical, including using alternative data. And 3, we facilitate comparison and benchmarks by aligning methodologies and assumptions, and compare and ensure we compare apples with apples. And why have we started developing that platform and those tools is basically we came out following a number of interviews, and based on my background and the background of my partners in the financial world, that there's a need for homogeneous data, which does not really exist today, as data are heterogeneous, incomplete. Lubomila and Frank mentioned the scope 3, the indirect emissions. It has to be counted, it has to be quantified and taken into account, as Frank mentioned, the PCAF methodology. It's also heterogeneous because methodologies are not standardized. Second, we found out there's a need for data at company level for financial institutions, including banks. They cannot work on climate transition risks, for example, based on industry averages. There are huge differences within an industry between different players. So it has to be company level. And I could potentially elaborate on that. Then in a few industries where it's relevant, there's a need for data at asset level, especially for banks, which could be potentially exposed. So this is what we develop and what we're working on. It's a long answer. Sorry, Cécile.
No, thank you. It's great because you actually went through part of my next question. So, and we heard from Lubomila the challenges that she sees, especially working with a lot of financial institutions. You mentioned it yourself. Not only do you work with financial institutions, but you also have your network there, your background, as well as your co-founder. And one of the challenges I hear that you see is the need for data at company level, and that companies, especially in the financial industry, are so different that one can't just take an average. So maybe it would be interesting at this point if you could elaborate a bit more on the challenges that you see for financial institutions, and maybe, as you were saying, maybe just elaborate a bit more on this one. Or any other ones, obviously, if you would like to make an addition to what's already been said.
Well, challenge for financial institutions for me is first to use carbon data, not only on reporting, but on decision making. It's crucial. And today, talking under the control of Frank, but data remains used mostly for reporting. In my eyes, and that includes investment world, private equity, hedge funds, etc. Data are not really used on making decisions. On the company we invest or we finance, and on the ecosystem of the company we invest or we finance. Because investing even in a software company could potentially mean that it's exposed to industries which are at risk or which are very carbonized, which has to be taken into account. And I agree with Lubomila when Lubomila was saying that decarbonization is not always the priority. It will be the priority when it will be taken into account by all decision makers in all financial institutions investing in equity or investing in debt. That's a huge challenge. You know, having Frank with us is great. I think BNP is probably at the forefront of banks regarding including data in decision making and working on climate transition risks, which is a huge issue for banks. But other banks are not as mature as they, and there's a huge way to go, and a huge need to make it simple and because it's not so complex, you know. So make it simple and then improve methodologies and become more and more accurate. But we've experienced some financial institutions making it too complex to really do something about it.
Yeah, maybe if I can add on immediately, I would fully subscribe what Christian is saying, because complexity is a big issue. And obviously, and this is, I think, is a big challenge, because essentially the entire investment banking sector will require the same information on basically carbon emissions, be it small or big companies. Obviously, the bigger companies will be much more aligned and early to adopt. But if we want to capture all of the market, not just the listed companies, which obviously is a big issue for ESG data today as well. We also need to find methodologies which, as Christian rightly says, are easy to understand, not only from the financial institution, but also easy to understand from the corporate side. And therefore, I would fully subscribe that we need a small set of KPIs, of methodologies which are really accepted globally, but then can be also scaled down to the smaller companies as well, because only then we will capture all of the market. So I think that is, I would fully subscribe there. And I will also thanks for the flowers. But indeed, yes, I think while we believe ourselves we are at the forefront, we are at no way arrogant to say that we will have done it. And having signed Net Zero Banking Alliance in April, we obviously realized, not after signing, but before signing, that in order for us to achieve the targets we set ourselves for 2030, we only have 15 to 18 months for roughly 50% of our portfolio, which is quite significant. So it's a huge issue, and therefore one of the questions was, where do we need green tech companies? I think we still have a little bit of more resources than maybe other banks, but even we still scratching our capacity here, and we need everybody, as also Ludmila said, to align ourselves on the methodologies which are believed to be relevant here.
Thank you very much, Frank. And actually, this is a great transition to the panel discussion. So actually, we heard a lot of the challenges which are being seen from two green tech companies. We've heard a lot also with regard to we need a small set first of KPIs, which are not the classical KPIs, because this is what's going to be able to help us move forward. So maybe Frank, as you heard what Lumila said, as you heard what Christian said, and how green tech could be supporting in that sense, what do you see, how do you see the role of these green techs supporting to first, just first get things done, first find these KPIs, support with the data, and report it. And one thing I really liked what Christian also said was it's not only about reporting, but it has to be integrated in the decision making. Where do you see the role of green tech here?
Well, I think what I could imagine is we need the data, but we also need it in a standardized form, and it needs to be validated so that it basically can be accepted and integrated in the existing risk management part, because this is what Christian rightly says. Today, our risk management is not geared towards taking non-financial data into final decision making. We're very much good in basically using financial data, but the non-financial data and the carbon data and the implications which it means in certain scenarios. I think this is one thing I think as well, and also as Ludmila said, I mean, being able to show various scenarios using various variables and to apply this to the regional, I think, activities of a certain financial institution or the sector which basically are in, I believe could be one angle for the companies to work on, because the advantage they have, I mean, sectors are relatively homogeneous, regions are not. So in a way, I think that would be one thing where if there's like a company like Planet A, Earth, with regional hubs and abilities, working on sector related approaches, but then applying them regional and factoring in regional differences could be one thing I can think of as a good combination with the financial institutions.
Thank you very much, Frank. And then I straight away turn to you, Lumila, and that echoes also what you had said, that you also had that certification that your data is also auditable. So do you see that going in that direction as well? Especially with the region. Sorry.
Yeah, I think what was just pointed out by Frank is incredibly important. And I must say that it takes a level of maturity and understanding on the industry in order to be getting to that challenge, because that challenge is not identified by many financial institutions at this stage. They don't see any geographical differences. They might be just considering doing a calculation, and then maybe their partner in doing that might be using conversion factors that are just European or maybe even on a global level. And I think this is where risk assessment becomes quite useless if you really don't understand what are the tangible challenges ahead of you. We combine these two sides where on one hand, we look at how do we calculate the emissions according to the GHG protocol using methodologies like PCAF, and then going, when it comes to financial institutions, going into the action side of things. Once the calculation is done, we look into the worst performing indicators of this particular organization to then identify what we call the action plan. This action plan is essentially the to-do list of a bank that can distribute between two groups. One is the low-hanging fruit, the things you can achieve in a short amount of time and can lead to up to 15% reduction. And then the rest is the 30 to 40%, which is kind of being able to hit net zero, where we're talking about systemic and more on a industry level complex challenges and changes that need to happen. What is really interesting to know is that at the moment, levels of accuracy are incredibly low if you look at the standardized frameworks, which is why with our product, we are even giving as part of the indications that you get on how the software analyzes your data is your level of accuracy. So you understand essentially, okay, this is the data that I've gathered. This is a data that I got from the third party, maybe a portfolio company. This data comes maybe from averages because we don't have access to data from this particular source. But at the end, you see where you're standing in total and what is the level of accuracy and where this level of accuracy is inconsistent with upcoming regulations. because some of you might know that some of the upcoming regulations are asking specifically for increased level of accuracy related to scope 3 category 1 and category 15. So these are the attempts that we have taken, and maybe this is the moment when I can mention 1 or 2 sentences about the GreenTech Alliance. Actually, the introduction that was done in the beginning was not any more accurate, because we already have more than 1,000 companies working on different solutions for businesses and also for individuals within these businesses. The GreenTech Alliance is a community essentially of these green tech innovators, and the aim that we target to achieve is supporting these businesses on their growth and accessing organizations like the one that Frank is leading and any others that might be of interest for their activities. And we're talking about solutions like alternative packaging. We're talking about asset level analysis of a portfolio where it goes really deep into financial returns related to ESG levels and so on. We're talking about waste management platforms that close the loop so circular economy is achieved, and so on and so on. What's really interesting, and I think this is the approach that needs to be balanced going forward, not only for financial institutions, but for any industry, is that we have to know that prescriptive to-do lists on how you achieve net zero are never going to be as effective if it's not combined with also innovating and testing what technology might work for you. We don't have enough time to be able to just work with a to-do list that has deadlines that are for next week and for the week after, and then we're working according to the quarter and the typical maybe reporting standards that we have within the corporate sphere. We really need to be allowing this kind of innovation to be tested at a larger scale. And I must say it from my own personal experience, if it was not for the large corporates that decided to work with us when we were very small, less than 10 people, we wouldn't have been able to get to where we are today. So that's maybe in summary a sentence about how also GreenTech can benefit from the support of large organizations as well.
Maybe here, direct question to you. How do you see, what does it need to make this more innovative approach and this possible to that also companies can experience more? What is it regulation? Is it more investment? What do you think is needed that this is possible?
Oh, the challenges are so many. The truth is that at the moment in the community, we have more than 200 companies that have fundraising, which is 20%, you know, it's a lot. And these are companies from all over the world. All of them are doing different things related to sustainability and are solving huge issues. But of course, this is in some cases incredibly capital intensive because some of them have hardware solutions, for example. Others are not so capital intensive, but still maybe are not in the biggest cities. Instead of being in Paris, they're in another small city in France. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is this collaboration among stakeholders. I am the biggest proponent of getting these startups, including myself as a startup founder, in front of the eyes of corporates, of governments, of NGOs, scientists, because we need to find the ways we can support each other. Everyone brings a different perspective, and these different perspectives are together going to lead to this effective action against climate change. And then the final challenge is the one of education. It's more qualitative, but I'm sure Frank also and Christian are going to agree. Cécile, you as well, Lucas, I'm assuming you, like we all maybe as practitioners in the space know that it's not necessarily so easy to come across with certain suggestions when you're talking to those that maybe have not identified this topic as important. We're benefiting from legislation, we're benefiting from the Green Deal, also from events like COP, but we have a long way to go until everyone is really convinced that this is the topic that needs to lead every single economic decision.
Thank you very much, Lubomila. That was very insightful, and I'd like to turn actually towards you, Frank, with regard to the education aspect, as Lubomila mentioned. So BNP Paribas seems to have taken this subject to its heart pretty early on. Now, returning maybe the question that Lucas was giving to Lubomila, what would it take to bring these companies forward from your perspective and from a big corporate perspective? What do you feel would you need from the green tech so that you can work together? I mean, I know this from my time when I was working in the digital transformation. This was a recurring topic. Corporates working with green tech companies have their challenges as well. How do you see it? What would your requirements be? Or could you even, as Lubomila was saying, green tech companies can be made bigger and can scale thanks to a big corporate, but that means obviously support and manpower from the corporate. So how do you see that?
No, thank you for the question. So indeed, this is something, I mean, BNP is not only in the green tech, but in the tech sector also involved. And I think we are supporting here when we the Frankfurt Tech Hub as well. I think clearly we have accepted very early on that we need tech companies. We have an innovation lab in France, but also in Berlin. Because we believe there's basically a coexistent and even fruitful cooperation. I think what it requires, and this is where we stayed the stage we are, is the gap analytics. Because as Ludmila also said, we will not be able to do all ourselves, especially on the science-based targets or structures there. So I think the first thing we are still in the process, as I mentioned, is to really see where the gaps, where we basically do not have sufficient data, resources, or knowledge. I think that is the first part. And therefore, like Ludmila says, early on engagement with financial institutions to identify where basically the strengths are, where basically the weaknesses also on the financial corporations, as also Christian mentioned, we're not implemented into risk management or management decisions. So to basically visualize what the service of the green tech would provide for a decision-making process, and also the way how to integrate this in existing structures will be basically key to convince ourselves, and I'm speaking in our financial institution, to basically go basically buy the service or support it. And I think therefore fundamental understanding how a certain sector in a financial institution works is, I think, crucial. But that also helps then really to bring forward the proposal and basically sell the service, because ultimately it's also something which green tech companies want to sell the service as well, is really, I think, the key. And I think, as Christian mentioned as well, providing scope 3 data is what we are really scratching our head on, because it needs to be complete. We need to have scope 1, 2, 3. And we need, as a financial institution, a reliable data where we can basically assess and potentially also create products around, because that's the next step. It's not only risk management, it's also a question, how do we create this new set of data which we are developing here? How can we make use of this data in order to also achieve a competitive position versus others? Because to be very honest, we do that here collaboratively, but it's also an assessment. Where can I basically use the data I'm generating in order to produce new products, or basically change maybe products which we already have?
Thank you. In that sense, I think maybe a question also to Christian Lubomila. It was mentioned by you, Lubomila, that the level of accuracy is also here a very big topic, not on the amount of data, but like really to get into the accuracy. And I think here more and transparent data is needed. How do you think, can you support, or how does it work to get this level of accuracy increased? Christian, maybe to you first.
Yeah, well, what we believe at Carbometrics is that data has to be accurate, you're right, and we use data science and machine learning, but on what's critical, it has to be accurate on what's critical, not accurate for the sake of being accurate. And let me just take one example. The automotive industry, scope 1 in the automotive industry is 1% of emissions. Scope 2 is 1%, and scope 3 is 98%. So being very accurate on direct emissions in the automotive industry is nonsense. Let me say, so what we've been working on in the automotive industry is a scope 3, downstream scope 3, using alternative data to compare all automakers in the world on sales per car models, features of each car model, and assess and benchmark all car makers in the world based on alternative data. So yes, accuracy is key, but on what's critical. So back to scope 3.
And how do you think you get accuracy into scope 3? Or how accurate is it if you use alternative data?
Well, it means working based on a sectoral approach first, because all sectors are different. So you need to understand processes, supply chains, sector by sector. Second, it requires a long time of assessing data sources to collect alternative data. So it's long investment, and that connects to the subject of today's panel. It requires cooperation between banks, financial institutions, and green tech, also with governments, academics, regulators, as was mentioned by Lubomila, because it takes time. It's demanding. By the way, I think climate and carbon data should be taken out of ESG and looked at independently of ESG and not diluted within ISG, because the issue is such that it has to be looked at directly. And if I may, I believe that as far as data is concerned, there's also a sovereignty issue for European banks and financial institutions based in Europe. Most data providers are US. There's an issue today to set standards and methodologies, and Europe is probably at the forefront of the climate awareness and action. So Europe has a role to play to that standard and methodology setting, and there's a need for European data providers versus US data providers.
Maybe I can add, we have a bit of a different approach to getting to high level of accuracy for automotive and also for financial institutions. I think what we have seen is really successfully working for many is, first of all, understanding some basics about an organization, which is where is their portfolio distributed. Every single bank or every single institution actually has access to this data already. Looking also into the type of investments that have been made, which is also data that is accessible by the bank or the financial institution. And then starting with a low level of accuracy and increasing the level of accuracy by first doing a smaller sample of the work where we get really deep into the scope 3. That's something that we now do with 3 different methods. One is that we invite the third parties related to this scope 3 to submit data. If this is not possible, we're able to predict the values because we have the scientific team in-house, and part of the team has been doing decarbonization of clusters of industries, has contributed to the IPCC report and so on. So we do know how to assume values. And then the final one is also looking into particular data points accessible to us by our databases, because we have been collecting a lot of data for the last 5 years for certain industries and sectors. After this is done, we already have quite of a good understanding of some of the footprint of the bank, and we increasingly work on the accuracy level by continuously, first of all, monitoring the accuracy level, which is part of the platform, and then going further into explaining what are the missing pieces and what are the options for this to hit 80%, 90% level of accuracy. And then it's up to the bank to decide to do that. One thing that we need to know is that at the moment, regulation does not want 100% accuracy. A bank can go and report on its emissions by basically using averages for quite a big chunk of the data. One of the reasons why many of the banks are looking now into increasingly achieving accuracy is because they're understanding that climate risk is financial risk. So they know that the more they know about their challenges ahead, the better they would be prepared to essentially respond to this future that is looking into unexpected capex related to infrastructure, related to any loss that is unfortunately influenced by different effects of climate change.
Thank you very much, Lubomila, for this addition. And in the interest of time, unfortunately, I think that's a wonderful note to end our discussion, that you were saying, well, banks are actually understanding that all is held together, and that, well, we have to actually urgently act, because otherwise it's a risk also for banks, and it will end in a financial risk. So I think at this point in time, we had lots of questions, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for the incredible discussion. I deeply enjoyed it. I still have in mind one thing that Christian said with regard to sovereignty, and I'm persuaded that you're building the solutions for European champions. So very excited to also see your path there of Carbometrics and Planet Earth. And with that, I'd like to end today's session. Please, if anyone has any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But in any case, thank you all for joining, and Lubomila, safe travels.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was fantastic.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.